Monetary Policy Committee of the Central Bank of Nigeria has reduced the country's interest rate to 27% for the first time since 2025. The governor of CBN, Dr. Laimi Cardoso, disclosed this during a press briefing after the 302nd Monetary Policy Committee meeting. The committee decided to reduce the monetary policy rate by 50 basis points to 27%. Cardoso noted that the reduction was due to consistent disinflation recorded in the country. Headline inflation eased to 20.12% in August 2025 from 21.88% in July, while food inflation moderated to 21.87% from 22.74%. Core inflation also dropped to 20.33% in the same period. The committee attributed the slowdown to exchange rate stability, declining PMS prices, improved capital inflows, and rising crude oil output. These factors, combined with surplus current account balances, have anchored inflation expectations and provided scope for monetary easing. The MPC highlighted the resilience of the Nigerian economy, with GDP growth accelerating to 4.23% year-on-year in the second quarter 2025 from 3.13% in the first quarter. This will be our focus on the program. Thanks for joining us on Nigeria Today. I am your carrier, Linton. With me in the studio to discuss the fallout of the MPC meeting is Dr. Ni Akinshiju. He's an investment and financial analyst. You're welcome to Nigeria Today.
Thanks so much for having me.
Also with us for this conversation is Yushau Aliyu. He's an economist and a public affairs analyst. It's a pleasure to have you on Nigeria Today.
Thank you very much.
I'll start with you, Yushau. Of course, the interest rate has dropped by 50 basis points, first time in 5 years. So what does this, let's start with, I know we've mentioned some of the factors that were highlighted, but beyond that, what are some other factors that you think contributed to this reduction?
First, we have to look back at the decision of MBS to rebase the economy, which has included additional basket of goods that always give cognizance to price changes. That is one. The second aspect is we have to also look at the economic environment, which unorthodox approach has been yielding result, especially in terms of improved security, additional food production, which also has helped the market. When you go on average, every market in Nigeria, you see plenty of food that has been taken from the harvesting ground to the market, and that has also assisted in reducing pressure on prices, especially perishable crops that are always giving headache to different households. However, we also have to appreciate the fiscal stability in the economy, which has also assisted several investors to invest at a relatively more convenient cost, which has also assisted the production. But however, looking at all these things, we have projected that as a central bank, prior to this in 2024, it was a MPR hike regime. But fortunately, in 2025, the central bank, looking at different economic component, macroeconomic aggregate, decided to halt any addition to the MPR, and that has also assisted the price regime at which different investors access funds in the financial sector.
Okay, Dr. Akinshiju, having heard the opening remark of Yushau, this drop came the first time in 5 years, and of course we've seen a situation where the hike was in fact recorded. We had about six hikes, in the past year. So what does this imply? What does this really mean to the economy?
So perhaps we still need to establish why the hikes in the first instance in 2024. It shows that there was an environment of constant price increase So when you have constant price increase, it does translate to huge high inflation. At a point in time, it was even becoming what we call galloping inflation. So much that up to December 2024, inflation returned at 34.8%. That was the first time, in a long while in Nigeria. And of course, inflation has multiple implications, for household consumption, for standard of living, and for human well-being. The first and very obvious implication is the erosion of values, monetary value. So that if you have 10,000 naira in January 2024, by December 2024, it would have lost value to about 34%. So if you hold 10,000, that same 10,000 would only be able to buy something worth 7,000 plus. So it had eroded the value of the money with you. And so the immediate tool to address inflation is the monetary policy rate tool. So with the monetary policy rate tool is deployed to control liquidity. The basic definition of inflation is, you have more money. I just want to use that basic definition, more money pursuing, less goods and services.
Exactly.
And so the tool is now to see how to constrain money, the volume and quantum of money in the economic environment in such a way that over time you now have an equilibrium between the money in circulation and the possible goods and services in supply. But of course, that is the ideal, the utopian, ideal. What the central bank will be looking at, because in constraining money, the liquidity, is to say that costs of credit, because the people who use credit are the manufacturers, producers, and all that, the very active segments of the economy are the people that use money. And because the central bank is now saying at this point in time, there's a need for us to control liquidity and now use MPR now increase the MPR rate, it does mean that it becomes difficult, for these users of credit, to access credit, because the rate at which they are going to access credit is now increased. Now, when the central bank now monitor the environment, especially by the figures and data issued by the NBS, the National Bureau of Statistics, they can now say, okay, it would appear from this data that inflation is falling. And now that the inflation rate is falling, can we also now start easing off the credit constraint in a way that those who use credit, can access credit at a cheaper rate, and in so doing, encourage and boost production and productivity. So what the CBN has done was to have increased the benchmark rate to a high of 27.5% to contain liquidity, that much naira that is believed to be in the environment, to restrict it, to reduce it, with other tools like the cash reserve ratio and all that. So, but now it's now believes, okay, from this 27.50, from 50, can we remove the 50, the 0.50 there, the 50 basis points, so that it will now reflect on how much, that is the rate at which banks, would also give credit to the users, manufacturers, producers, and all that. So the idea is that producers now get credit, even household that also want credit, get it at a lesser cost. And mostly, this will also transmit into the cost of production. And so that at the end of the day, it will also enhance price deceleration, inflation deceleration, because price now would also reflect that interest rate that had been reduced, as a cost input in the pricing template.
Okay. Now back to you shall, financial experts or economists have argued that ways and means have been a contributory factor or a driver of the increased inflation rate. So tell us this concept of ways and means. Talk to us, about it, and what exactly are the benefits?
You see, ways and means will remain a concept where government have easy access to funding process, and that has also diseconomies as witnessed in the Nigerian economy. But controlling liquidity has to do with controlling the ways and means. And if you look at several forces that are increasing liquidity within the economy, it appears that there is no much need to adopt ways and means as an instrument of financing different developmental projects around the economy. Meanwhile, if we assess, for instance, the revenue sharing formulas which has been produced by Revenue Mobilization Allocation and Fiscal Commission, and you check the sharing formula of all, you realize that that liquidity that is changing rapidly from 2024 to 2025 is enough to take care of all exigencies that will qualify ways and means, because there is no any good financial definition of ways and means in a digital economy, ways and means in an analog economy. But what we are emphasizing here is you look at the sharing formula, the revenue generation that has increased over a period from 560 billion to around 2.2 trillion in 2025 in September. That shows that there is, in an attempt to control inflation, definitely monetary authorities have to look at the concern raised by revenue sharing, which is coming at a sufficient level and is coming also at different intervals. But ways and means, which government normally adopt to have additional ways in which funding process can be achieved, is no longer significant once you look at the capacity of the economy and the target of the economy. If you're looking at the emphasis of recapitalizing the banking sector, you have to be more careful in checking how excess liquidity can play a role in an economy that we are trying to merge financial inclusion by all components of investors to arrive at a successful capitalization exercise of central bank.
Thank you very much, Yushau. We'll take a short break now. This conversation will continue shortly. Don't go away.
The implementation of the ruling is also dependent on another aspect or another arm of government.
Nowhere in the world will allow under digital economy for banks not to be dispensing domestic currency in that economy.
What will make this one different? We want to know what they do as occupation. All of these are attributes that our questions have been designed to investigate.
In a few days to come, you see that we are all around their own crannies and everywhere in Nigeria, telling people to cooperate.
Welcome to Nigeria Today. Welcome back. In case you're just joining us, this is Nigeria Today. We're looking at the fallout of the NPC meeting that was held yesterday. So now, of course, I have two gentlemen, two economic experts here in the studio for this conversation. Now, Dr. Akinshiju, talk to us about still this ways and means. I know in the past we've heard about it so much, and like I said earlier on, some economists have argued that it's part of the drivers, the force that is driving the inflationary rate upwards. Now, is it that this present administration is not indulging in it? So I really want to get it clear so we'll know exactly why we are getting the result we're getting.
Yeah, actually, when Dr. Cardoso was newly appointed, his first declaration was that there was not going to be ways and means. And what's the meaning of ways and means and its implication? Ways and means are the basic. It's like an overdraft. A bank customer who enjoys overdrafts with the bank, the CBN is the government bank. So when government has a problem with revenue, especially when you have a shortfall in projected revenue, the CBN, I mean the government can approach the CBN and say, okay, give us an overdraft. So the word, the meaning or the translation of that term is ways and means. So, and it's also part of the law. But the law says that the CBN can only issue the value of that ways and means up to the 5% of the preceding year's total revenue. So if the preceding year's total revenue, for instance, was 100 million, what the CBN can grant the government as ways and means would be 5% of that value. But between 2020 and 2023, 2022 especially, what the CBN, granted the federal government was up to 24. In fact, at a point in time, we're even looking at 30 trillion naira. Now, the concern there is that when ways and means also translate in implementation to printing of money that is non-asset backed. It is called errant money. It's not tied to value. So the CBN just prints money to that tune as requested by the federal government. And so when, just like Malam Yushal noted, when that volume of money gets into the environment, it becomes a huge liquidity. Liquidity that is not tied to a particular asset. It's not based on income, it's not based on value, neither is it based on assets. Asset could be gold, your gold bullion, could be the country's sovereign wealth or something. But in this case, you only have naira, that is not tied to anything. So because you now have that huge amount of currency, of naira, floating in the environment, it now becomes a liquid. They now call it a liquidity problem. So because the liquidity problem, just as we have said, you now have more money in circulation, larger, much larger than the goods and services. And because it is much larger now, you now have, of course, pricing would, of course, respond to that. And that's why people will say you had inflation. But in this case now, under this government, the government made a commitment that it will not, of course, the CBN said it will not grant, and that even the executive should not come at all. In fact, the important thing is come and pay up, And fortunately, the government also got its groove back by being able to also enhance revenue generation.
Thank you very much. Now, Yushal, we now have a decline. Our inflation is going down.
Yeah.
And the MPC has said, okay, the interest rate has reduced. How do we sustain this?
CBN has done its best in recent times. I am a proponent of not in the proposition of high MPR, but over a time the central bank halted and then look at the economic environment and look at the performance of the economy, and now began to not only halting the rate, but reducing it by 50 basis, which I have postulated earlier than now, that I'm expecting the central bank to reduce it by at least 50 or 25 basis points, which is going to be more sustainable. Now, the trajectory of inflation, removing ways and means, and then looking at the revenue generation is also going to pose a lot of risk, because if you are sharing 2.2 trillion in nearly 30 days to the tiers of government, and then you need to control them. And I'm happy that the central bank, using cash reserve ratio, is now attempting to control all public funds, but it's not going to be enough. Now, supply bottlenecks, which also always affect most of the agricultural product in the market, has to be looked into. Last year, what I failed to mention earlier, in terms of policies that has assisted the supply bottlenecks of goods and services, was the waiver granted by the federal government, which has assisted at the inflow of a lot of capital goods without taxes attached to them. So now what we are hoping is that the agricultural input necessary, central bank has to intervene. They have to intervene. They have models which can be used from those reserve currencies using CRR, especially from the public funds, to make good use of them to procure and then sell good agricultural input at better prices. I'm not saying that the central bank should subsidize, but now the central bank is at an advantage because the PMS importation has assisted in stabilizing the foreign exchange. So now the production of required inputs should be given emphasis, which probably our farmers can always access input that is cheaper. The second aspect is the central bank also looking at the capitalization exercise. The central bank has to be bold enough to protect the banking sector by bringing right investors within the economy. I'm not always happy to have foreign-dominated financial markets because of the issue of exogenous practices which always attract perfect withdrawal of funds. So the bank should try and consolidate the capitalization by bringing in investors that are domestically based.
Thank you very much. Then, Dr. Akinshiju, in just one minute, tell us, what does this translate to? You know, we're talking about the ordinary, because at the end of the day, the ordinary man will say, okay, what they are speaking is grammar. So how does it translate to me bringing food on the table?
Well, the grammar is that there's an attempt now to boost production through, of course, those who use, like I noted, those who use credit will now get credit at a cheaper rate. So when you get credit at a cheaper rate, it will also reflect in your production cost. So what is called the input cost. So at the end of the input cost, at the other hand is the output cost. Because the cost you have imputed is cheaper now. The output cost will also be cheaper, and will now determine a reduced price. It may be, marginal, but we think this is also the beginning. My organization, for instance, projected that by December we should have a 17% inflation rate. The president had projected 15%. So
and we're working towards
yes,
it.
And we are saying it very. If we are able to hit 17, we'll hit 15. And if we hit 15, it becomes a comfort zone.
At the beginning of the year, everybody was thinking it's not possible.
It's not possible. Yes.
That's
some of us at that time, until we started calibrating, we were like, hey, is it possible?
Is it possible?
But now it is showing possibility. Because one, you are seeing the way the CBN is calibrating the whole framework. And we believe that just another minimum, you just need 100 basis points reduction of inflation every month, and you get to that 15. So when you get to that 15, it means value for money. That money, that same 10,000 that are reduced to 7,000 plus in December 2024 will now go back to the same 10,000, by the end of the year next year.
Of course, that is what every Nigerian is praying for.
That is the language for.
Every Nigerian is praying for that. You go to the market, you're able to buy food, the little money you have in your hand. Thank you very much, Dr. NTA Akinshiju, investment and financial analyst. Thank you so much for coming on the program, and also you, Shawaliu, an economist and public affairs analyst. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you.
And thank you for being part of the program. I'm Ikaria Clinton. Goodbye.